Today on the Bible Reading Challenge podcast, we're going to give an overview of the book of Ecclesiastes. My name is Aaron Ventura, and I'm joined today again by Pastor Doug Wilson. Pastor Doug, welcome back for the, 30th, 20th time. We've done a lot of these. So you wrote a commentary on the book of Ecclesiastes long ago in the 90s.
I know. That was back when I knew something.
Yeah. And the commentary is called Joy at the End of the Tether, and I think there's probably been multiple covers of it, but I think the most recent cover has some spilled milk on the front.
Yeah.
So why did you call it Joy at the End of the Tether? What does that mean?
Okay. So at the end of the tether obviously means you're at the end of yourself. You've exhausted your resources. There's nothing more you can do, and then you're good with that. So you come to realize that these limitations are a gift from God, received in the right way. They're a gift. If you receive the very same things without faith, they're just totally exasperating. Right. So accepting the limitations that God has placed on us in faith is something that enables us to enjoy the futility. Futility is not something to be kicked against. It's to be received as a present.
Yeah. So many people have found themselves frustrated by their finitude. Mm-hmm. How should we feel about our finitude?
Yeah, so the frustration with our finitude is basically succumbing to the temptation of the garden. You shall be as God. We think we want to be infinite,
but not like the way we are. Right. That would be bad.
Yeah, what people want is, I think they don't want to be infinite. They think they want to be as God, but what they really want to be is bigger. They want to be Zeus, or
they want to be over control all the things,
all their circumstances, instead of being an element within those circumstances, which appear to continue to do what they have always done. And so we want to have more control over the steering wheel. We want to have more mastery. We want sovereignty, because we don't want to trust the one who is sovereign. We want to become sovereign, or some other people kidding themselves just settle for pretending that they're sovereign.
Mm-hmm. So draw the distinction then between dominion and the kind of sovereignty that you are describing. What is the difference there?
The difference is if you're grasping for sovereignty, you want to be the final voice, the final law, the final arbiter of what happens. When we exercise dominion, the last stage after all the work we do is, and now we trust God. Mm-hmm. So we plow, we prepare the soil, we do the hard work of getting the seed in the ground, and then we trust God. Yeah. We turn it over to the weather, right? And you say, well, if you turn it over to the weather, there's no way to do that without recognizing that we are not in charge of the weather and God is. So that it's simply another way of trusting Him. So when God blesses 30, 60, and 100-fold, He's doing this with the person who relies on Him, trusts in Him, hopes in Him. And that's the one part that we don't want to do. We want to walk it all the way through and see our harvest safely home, or our shipment safely in, or we want to control everything from soup to nuts, from A to Z.
Yeah. So what is God doing to us by frustrating our efforts to, as it says, shepherd the wind, or hold on to the wind?
Yeah.
It seems like this whole book is Solomon. Yes, Solomon is the author. There's no one else. It is Solomon's wrestling through some of these questions and seeking out, okay, what is the purpose of God in I can't get no satisfaction?
Right. Yeah. Solomon antedated the stones. So basically, the book is chapters 1 and 2. Everything is vanity, chasing after wind, futility. Everything is, and by that, you should think repetition, cycles. So it's not so much everything is absolute chaos. It's not absolute chaos. What it is recurring rhythms in and out. The tide goes in, the tide goes out. The tide goes in, the tide goes out. The sun comes up, the sun goes down. God has built these cycles that the squirrel cage run keeps going around.
Yeah.
All right. So it's repetition, and everything is subject to that. That's chapters 1 and 2. Then chapters 3, 4, and 5 basically are an exposition of God's sovereignty. God is sovereign over everything, and God controls everything. And then chapters 6, 7, and the first part of 8 would be the application of God's sovereignty to that futility, to that those cycles. So if everything is as futile as it appears to the wise man that it is, and God is absolutely sovereign, then only this absolutely sovereign God can make sense out of the futility, can give satisfaction in the midst of the futility. Yeah. And then the last part of the book, second part of chapter 8 through the end of the book, is FAQs. Well, what about this and what about that? And tidying up and answering objections and that sort of thing. So rather than treating the book as a grab bag of sometimes optimistic nihilism and sometimes pessimistic nihilism, where they're all just thrown in the bag.
Believe the best.
Yeah. Because there's some real chirpy passages in there. Yeah. Enjoy the wife of your youth and remember God, and you could, if you went through the book, if you're preaching to a group of people who had never read the book of Ecclesiastes, you could cherry pick the book and make them think it was the most optimistic, upbeat book ever, and you could do the exact opposite. Yeah. But you have to cherry pick in order to do it. So rather than seeing it as a grab bag of miscellaneous texts, I believe there's a sustained argument, and the sustained argument is under the sun. That phrase occurs something like 28 times, somewhere around there through the book. So many of the on the surface despairing texts have a realm of discourse under the sun, as far as we're concerned, without reference to the transcendent. Okay, there's no difference between the life of a man and the life of a beast. They both die and their bodies both rot. Yeah. Okay, under the sun.
So would you say under the sun in kind of like New Testament systematic theology terms, you might say is like living by sight, whereas like over the sun is the eyes of faith?
Yes, absolutely. So under the, I think that's a good way of putting it. So what we can see, the visible, presentable world, this tangible world, I look at the clouds raining and then the water evaporating and then the clouds rain again. That's what I see under the sun. Yeah. Okay, so when I see that under the sun, if I had no transcendental reference point, all I see is me caught in this endless cycle. Yeah. And that's as far as I can see. But if and this is the thing that's I think a unique aha moment, that when you get Ecclesiastes, this is the aha moment. When God intervenes and gives you the gift of sight, he doesn't say, no, it's not futile. What he does is says, yes, it is futile. Your life is smoke. Enjoy the smoke. Yeah. Right? Embrace the smoke. This is how I did it. And so the idolatrous man wants to transcend the smoke himself. He wants to transcend the repetition himself instead of embracing it and saying, God, it's spiritually healthy for me to embrace my finitude, embrace the fact that I have to go to bed and get up in the morning and I have to do it again. I have to put the food on the plate, get it dirty, put it in the sink. And how many housewives? Here I am again at the sink. Or they're in the laundry room. Here I am again doing laundry. Why does this have to keep going this way? Well, God gives us, and only the God of the Calvinist really can give the satisfaction to men in that sort of circumstance. Where, and this is hard to explain, it's hard to put into words, but I remember when I was first preaching this series of sermons, or somewhere back when I was first working through these things, I was standing up on in our house. It was up on a hill, and the main road went by left to right, down below, and I had what I call an Ecclesiastes moment. There's some guy in a pickup truck blowing down the road, and he just zipped, and I thought, well, there he goes. It was no doubt somewhere important, important to him. But you get this perspective and say, okay, we're all just ants scurrying around, but we're ants made in the image of God. So Ecclesiastes, God has put eternity in our hearts. There's a reason for our dissatisfaction with this, but we can't resolve the dissatisfaction from within ourselves. We can hunger for a resolution from within ourselves because that's how we're made, but we can't scratch the itch from within ourselves.
Yeah, it's funny when you read, so like the first chapter, it talks about the wind goes towards the south, the rivers run into the sea's not full. Under the sun, it seems like the ancients were right to say that history is just, matter is eternal. It's just, we're on this endless cycle. And kind of the Christian view or the Hebraic view says, no, it actually is going somewhere, but you need faith to be able to see that. So could you talk about how, so first, some people have read Ecclesiastes as kind of a non-Christian book or as this fatalist book, and how would the kind of worldview of Ecclesiastes shape our understanding of history?
Yeah, the only way they can get it to be like a nihilistic book or a book of relativistic despair is by cherry picking. So the conclusion of the matter at the end of the book is fear God. Yeah. Right. Well, okay, that's not nihilism.
Yeah, for them, they would say that's non sequitur. They're just like, this is all you can do.
Right. And so what they're doing is they're saying, well, that was just some pious editor tacked that and said, this book is way too dark. Let's put a little smiley face on the last page. But it's not a smiley face. The illustration I use in Joy at the End of the Tether is God gives humans all our worldly goods are like cans of peaches. Mm-hmm. And the one who has faith in an absolutely sovereign God who's also good is the one who by faith is given a can opener. So what would you rather have, a can of peaches and a can opener, or 1,000 cans of peaches and no can opener? Well, the rich man, the miser, the man with any woman he wants, the man with all the gold in the world, but has no capacity, is like a rich man who can afford to eat in all the best restaurants in the world, but he has no taste buds. Yeah. And so fearing God or enjoy the wife of your youth, rejoice before the Lord, that is only possible if a transcendent God gives that gift into this world of smoke. If that world of smoke is blessed, if the person with faith in a sovereign God can receive that gift in the midst of this, and it's not that God pulls back the curtain and you say, oh, this world is full of good sense, or oh, this world is it really matters after all. Oh, it's not futile. No, this world really is futile, and you were built to live here, and this is a feature, not a bug. And if I receive it in faith and enjoy it, then I can come at last to the place where all these things are resolved. The new heavens and the new earth in their consummation won't be like this.
Yeah. It's amazing. As I read your commentary, I've read a number of commentaries on Ecclesiastes, and this has been one of the most helpful books in understanding Jesus' parables. And the greater than Solomon, it seems like if everything is vapor and you take something like wealth, for example, and what Jesus says about it, it's like God has given us all this vapor and wants us to turn a profit on it in such a way that in the kingdom, the treasure you've stored up there, you need stuff here to store up treasure there. Yeah. So in a certain sense, it's just vapor. But in another sense, in faith, it becomes something actually solid in the new heavens and new earth.
Yeah. So Jesus says, use unrighteous mammon so that but to make friends for yourselves here. You have vapor coins and you invest them in order to get more vapor coins so that you may take other ghostly vapors out to dinner and share the gospel with them so that by means of unrighteous mammon, these people might receive you into eternal habitations. Mm-hmm. So Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist philosopher, said, he took this the wrong way, but he said, without an infinite reference point, every finite point is absurd. Mm-hmm. I think that that's exactly correct. And he held that there is no infinite reference point. Yeah. But the Christian can say amen, and there is the sovereign God, the God who determines all things. So there is an infinite reference point, and every finite point is meaningful, but only in that framework. Yeah. Under the sun, considered in its own right, in its own merit, it's absurd.
Yeah. Reminds me of when Jesus says, dividing between the sheep and the goats, what you did for the least of these, you did to me. And so when we're doing the laundry, when we're doing the dishes, at the last judgment, Jesus is going to say, what you did for your kids or what you did for the stranger, that little meal, that cup of cold water, that vapor was actually a good work.
It was registered elsewhere.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I want to ask a number of questions about stuff that could be read on the surface to mess with some of our categories. And one would be this refrain over and over again that there's nothing new.
Right.
So there's nothing new under the sun. And so what would you say to the retort, aren't iPhones and Bitcoin new, right? We didn't have that 100 years ago. Right. What does he mean by there's nothing new under the sun?
Yeah, so I don't think he's talking about inventions. I think he's saying that the inventions, whatever they are, don't touch what's actually going on. So, and this is the perennial problem of the person who's got sort of the chirpy, progressivist, evolutionary view of human progress. We're gonna grow and evolve to this greater and greater heights. Solomon would come in and say something like this: yeah, you've got the internet now, but people are still ignorant. And the internet simply enables them to move their ignorance around the world at greater rates of speed. Mm-hmm. So I can be in a village in Palestine 2,000 years ago. Someone could tell me a story, and I can be gullible and believe it. Mm-hmm. Or now, someone in New Zealand can tell me a story, and I'm being gullible, believe it. And they told me this story, but what is going on differently in terms of the principle? Mm-hmm. The principle is someone's telling lies and someone's believing them. That's constant. It doesn't matter if someone whispered a slander 2,000 years ago or sent a slander on parchment 500 years later or told it on a telephone with landline 2,000 years later, and then now click send. Yeah. The same thing is going on, right? So Solomon says in Proverbs 18:17, one person's case seems real reasonable till you hear the other side. Well, that principle, this is a principles and methods thing. Principles are constant. Methods vary. So when Solomon says nothing is new under the sun, and you say, oh, yeah, well, look at this. People wear pants now instead of robes. He would say yes, but they're still doing the same things.
Yeah,
they're
some have more pockets than others.
Yeah, some have more pockets, but culture, dress, hairstyles, skinny neckties, wide neckties, no neckties, those sorts of things would be. Solomon would backhand it, saying you're looking at this superficially. You're not viewing these things down to the bottom. Yeah. So there's nothing. Yeah, there really is nothing new. The more things change, as our proverb goes, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Or as that song a generation ago, meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
Yeah. It reminds me, I was in Geneva, got to go to see John Calvin's church, and it's great.
Of course. Did you hear the bells?
Yeah. It's like, wow, what would it have been like to live there? No dancing, that's one thing.
Right.
And they have this little Reformation museum there, and you can go in and look at a number of artifacts. And one of the things that I noticed was the meme warfare between the Protestants and the Papists. And you think, we think memes are a new thing, the little GIFs and stuff, but like we've been doing that. That's been done for hundreds of years, probably more. I don't know if there's memes inscribed into stone, but I'm sure there is somewhere.
Right.
Maybe that's what actually the paintings of the animals on the walls are. Who knows? Okay. I wanted to ask, so you mentioned a little bit the outline. So do you see a narrative progression in the book from beginning to end?
I see an argument progressing from beginning to end, yeah.
Okay. So chapter 1, verse 18 says this, "For in much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow." So talk a little bit about the relationship between wisdom, knowledge, and why that makes you sad.
Yeah. A.W. Tozer once said, "Anybody who wants to be happy should most emphatically not pray for the gift of discernment." If you see what's actually going on, and then and let's say there's 100 people there, and you have wisdom, and you see what's actually all the jockeying for position, and the striving, and the competition, and you see all the chess plays. What you're going to see is a lot of selfishness, right? And not only are you going to see selfishness, you're going to see delusional selfishness. You're going to see a bunch of people being selfish, thinking that they're being altruistic, thinking that they're standing up for the principle when it's their ox that's being gored and everything. So I think that this is simply a bit of surface level cynical advice. Basically, the more you know what's going on, the more tempted to discouragement you will be.
Yeah. I forget which psalm it is where it says, man at his best is nothing. He's vainer than vanity itself, I think, in one of the translations. The same kind of language, which you think of all of the, heroes in history, and, God basically says, line up your best, and it's not much.
Yeah, line up your best, most noble characters, and all of them breathe through their nose. All of them are. When we look at men who are proud, and they make a peacock throne, for themselves, it can really overawe the peasants. Whoa, he's really something, but. I think of Diogenes. I might have some details of this story wrong, but Alexander the Great, Diogenes was a cynic, not Solomonic, but he saw enough, right? Alexander the Great came to him. He lived in a tub. Diogenes did, and Alexander came and asked Diogenes what he could I do anything for you, and Diogenes said, "Yeah, you could get out of my sunlight." Well, another occasion, Diogenes was picking through some bones, and Alexander said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm trying to figure out the difference between the bones of your ancestor and the bones of his slave." Right. So it's that kind of. In the moment, someone could say, "Oh, Alexander, he's really something," but someone could say, 100 years from now, we're all going to be dead and in the ground, and where will all these distinctions be then? Now, if you have that reference point under the sun and know fear God and keep His commandments at the end of the book, then it's going to be, Diogenes the cynic, and it's just going to be cynicism. But if you have faith, you're going to see what's going on. And you won't be fundamentally discouraged because 118, I think, is talking about a step in this. Yeah. So if you trust in God, you're going to see understand, embrace, and rejoice.
Yeah, I think it says later on in chapter 9, when you see injustice in high places, this is like, do not marvel.
Yeah.
Don't be surprised that people are doing wicked things. And it seems to come from this idea. And it also makes you wonder, it helps explain why Jesus said some of the things he did about, how much longer must I bear with you people, and why he's called by Isaiah a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. He knew what was in man, and it wasn't good.
Right. If you have this real, true discernment, and you're not kidding yourself, you have true discernment, you're going to be tempted to discouragement.
Yeah. Moving on to the calendar passage, maybe the most calendar passage in the whole Bible, Ecclesiastes 3. So we have this poem, and it says, "Everything God has made beautiful in its time." What is the point of this poem? What are we supposed to take away from this?
Well, this is a poem that the birds taught us. So I think, remember that vanity is cyclic. Chapters 1 and 2 is all about the repetitive nature of things. And then this section, chapter 3, is the section that exalts in the sovereignty of God. This repetitive pattern of everything is not here by accident. It was designed and placed here. And it serves a purpose, even though all you can see is the wheel going round and round. You see it going round and round, and you say, here we are again, another summer. Here we are again, another winter. Here we are again. And everything is beautiful in its time. God has placed these cogs and cycles and wheels to turn in a certain way. And under the sun, we can't discern. It's like we were born into the innards of a clock. And we see all these wheels turn, these cogs and wheels turning, and I can tell that they're round. I can tell that it's a cog. I can tell that it's operational and there's some purpose to it. But unless God took us from outside the clock and up and looked at the clock face, that's what it's. I could tell that there was a purpose. Yeah. And this is clearly running, and so everything's beautiful in its time. But I still don't know. I still don't have the vantage that enables me to see what that point is.
So when you look at it, a time to love, a time to hate, a time of war, and a time of peace, are we meant to be able to discern when it's a time for war or a time for peace, or is this just describing things the way they are? Yeah. And then if we are able to discern, or even if not, are we meant to, are we sinning to not consider everything beautiful in its time? Things that seem very ugly.
Like war.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this is a tough one. I'll answer it this way. I think there are a handful of people that have what I would call the prophetic eye. Okay, the prophetic eye is a lot of when people first become Christians, they sometimes think of prophecy as foretelling. Foretelling the future. That's what they think prophecy is. And then if they're taught well, the preacher will sometimes say, no, the bulk of the work of the prophets is forthtelling, telling people the way it is now. And their calling card or their validation that I really am from God is the occasional prediction of the future. So Isaiah says, tell us the things that are to come hereafter, that we may know that you're God's. So prove it, okay? But then I would say it's not just a matter of the prophetic eye is not just something that sees things going on now, but the prophetic eye sees the root causes, sees to the bottom. All right, so the prophetic eye is not so much seeing ahead as it is seeing to the bottom. Okay, so the prophetic eye sees to the bottom. Now, in any era, let's say a martial spirit falls on a nation, war fever. Yeah. Right? So nations go to war, and because nations want to. Right? And that's a shock to the people who think that wars are orchestrated by arms manufacturers and a handful of people at the top who say, let's have a war. Don't know how human beings operate. Nations go to war because the people want to go to war. A handful of people can, in the moment, see through all of that to the bottom. But it's not like you've got these prophetic eye people who see through and who say, oh, it's time for a war, and then they talk everybody into one. Right? The vast majority of human beings do what they do in the moment because they're driven by forces that they don't understand. Mankind is a herd animal, and when we are all of a sudden all doing the same thing, you look around, hula hoops everywhere, or masks everywhere, or whatever it is, we congregate, we cluster, we copy, and a handful of people see what's going on, and they see a transition coming. Let's say if it's a time for war, time for peace, there'll be a time of transition where some people are preparing us for the next phase, but we generally do something until our emotional energy is spent, and then we give it up. And most of us just do it. So it's not like the populace gets a pre-printed agenda. It's time for this. Now, some things like a time to sow and a time to reap, there we know, well, that's the springtime, that's the fall. That's kind of assigned. But those other things, a time to mend, time to keep silence, time to speak, those are going to be driven by forces that most people don't understand. And yet most of them will get it right.
So is this a text you would use at a funeral, preaching a funeral?
Yeah, I think you could misuse it at a funeral, but I think that it would be a good text for a funeral. Yeah.
Just wanted to check. One of my favorite verses in this whole book is Ecclesiastes 5:20, and I think the ESV has a version I like a little better, where it says, "God keeps man occupied with joy in his heart, yet so that he will not remember the former days." Could you talk about what this means for God to keep us busy with joy? Because isn't that what we want?
Yeah. God keeps us busy with joy. This is a funny thing about people. So think over when you get together with friends, and you're everybody's sharing their best stories, right? The funniest stories, the best stories. Invariably, those are going to be the stories of their most miserable times. Yeah. Okay, camping stories. All the tent collapsing in a rainstorm stories. And at the moment, it seems like it's the never-ending thing. And when I was in high school, I went to Pioneer Camp in Ontario, and we were on a 2 or 3 day canoe trip off from lake to lake, and it was great. But we went to camp, and we put 2 canoes on their side, paddles across them, and people would sleep with their head in one canoe and their feet in the other canoe. And
what could go wrong?
And so they were all stacked up, and we did this, and we realized that there wasn't room for everybody. And so I slept outside in my sleeping bag. And this was the old days of sleeping bags that were wool. This is way back in the. And I woke up something like 2 in the morning, and it was raining, and there wasn't anywhere to go. And there's nothing to do in my wool sleeping bag except lie there and take it.
Be wet.
be wet and just soldier through. Well, in the morning, that morning was glorious when you got up and there's a fire, and but that was the longest, most miserable event. Yeah. And it's one of my best stories. So now I'm talking about it now, and I can enjoy talking about it now. And the hours of misery is just a blip. You stick a pin in it. Yeah. So you look at, and this is just an illustration. He will not remember the days of his life because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart. If you have joy in your heart now, you can look back on all of these things that have happened to you with equilibrium.
Yeah. It seems like what God wants us to do is to have that desire to tell stories in the kingdom of our life here. We don't want to get to heaven and have no stories to tell. And so how do we maintain that kind of perspective, which seems to be what this whole book is about, getting perspective above the sun? How do we maintain that?
Yeah, I think the answer is by faith, trust God, keep his commandments. That's the way to wisdom. So if I assume the thing that he does in the beginning of the first 2 chapters is he's slapping the steering wheel out of our hands. You have to abandon all hope of controlling this yourself. You're not up to it. You're not competent. You cannot. The recycling patterns of this world are going to grind you to powder. You cannot manage or control or get in front of or stop it. You just can't. So he disabuses us of our conceit and our pride in the first 2 chapters. And then 3, 4, and 5, he exalts the sovereignty of God. And so man down, first 2 chapters, man down. The next 3 chapters, God exalted. Yeah. Right. So I think that the way to maintain perspective is to cultivate humbled thoughts of your own prowess and exalted thoughts of God's. So God's management of one electron contains more wisdom than all the human libraries in the world, right? And that's one electron. And every human body has trillions of cells in it. And we're talking trillions of stars, not only trillions of stars, but trillions of galaxies. And God is managing all of that. He knows every atom by name. And you say, okay, I need to meditate on this. I need to meditate on how close to a mathematical point I am. And yet, God has put eternity in my heart. Yeah. So I'm just a couple notches above a mathematical point, created in the image of God and equipped to think about these things. But if I'm freed up to think about them, I'm charged by the book of Ecclesiastes to think about them soberly and with wisdom.
I wanted to go to a passage in chapter 7. So this is verse 16, and this tends to throw some people. So it says, do not be overly righteous, nor be overly wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Do not be overly wicked, nor be foolish. Why should you die before your time? So I thought being righteous was good.
Yes. And of course, so this is how I take that passage. I think it's a wonderful passage. We all know that there's a certain kind of mentality that says if one's good, then two's better. So, okay, if 1 cup of sugar, 1 teaspoon of sugar in my coffee is good, then 2's better, and 3's better than that, and and if someone discovers that righteousness is good, there's a fastidious kind of religious personality that the original Puritans weren't like that, but the word puritanical comes to describe it, or pharisaical comes to describe it, where Jesus talks about the men who tithe out of their spice rack. Right.
Which would be kind of difficult to do.
You bring a little spice home and you take it out and you weigh it and you say, okay, here's a tenth of that. They tithe out of their spice rack. They strain out gnats and swallow camels. And I think that's the kind of person, the pharisaical personality, the person who is all about the rules and is all about holiness and all about righteousness. And Solomon tells us, look, you're overdoing it.
You're going to destroy yourself.
You're going to destroy yourself. And that's actually what happened with. I said the Puritans weren't actually like this. So for the first 100 years or so of the Puritan movement, as C.S. Lewis said, bishops, not beer, were their special aversion. So the original Puritans, the first century Puritans, were exuberant, liberated, relieved, happy people. They weren't the caricature of the Puritan. But eventually, that caricatured Puritan did come into existence. The dour, pinched, grumpy person. God wants us grumpy. And that always comes from the notion that God is looking down from heaven, trying to figure out if anybody down there is having a good time so that he can get them to stop it, right? So that is the person, the caricatured church lady, the Pharisee, the puritanical grumbler. And, well, those kids are running and laughing and playing. I need to go pour some cold water in their soup. That's the person who's overly righteous. And the person, another example of the person of the individual who is overly righteous would be the devil. Yeah. The devil is, it says in Revelation, the accuser of the brethren, who accuses them day and night before the throne. Well, what's he doing? What's he doing accusing? Well, he's accusing them of being unrighteous. The devil, what many people don't realize is the devil is self-righteous. The devil thinks he's got a point. And when we are in the grip of that kind of thinking, when we are violating the wisdom of this verse, we are more like the devil than any other time. So someone who is fomenting a church split by accusing the elders or accusing the pastor, and they're grasping at straws, and then they took my parking spot and they think they're better than you. That kind of snarling, biting and devouring. Paul says in Galatians, don't bite and devour each other. Those people are far more diabolical than some guy in that congregation who's at home looking at internet porn. Mm-hmm. Now, he shouldn't be doing that. That's a sin, but it's not. It's not approaching the diabolical nature of the people who are wrecking a church, thinking they're doing God's business.
Yeah, it seems like one of the ways we talked about keeping this perspective of that eternal perspective is this refrain he gives a number of times where go eat your bread, drink your wine, rejoice with the wife of your youth, anoint your head with oil, have a nice shower, put some shampoo in your hair.
Everything's futile, have a party.
Yeah, so talk about how, the place of feasting, enjoyment, how do we go home at the end of the workday, kiss our kids, our wife, enjoy that when there's all of this wickedness, evil, futility in the world. And especially as a pastor, you're carrying the needs, the burdens of the congregation, you're fighting battles.
Yeah.
How do you not destroy yourself as you're seeking to be faithful?
Yeah. I like to think of this as not so much R&R from the fight. Mm-hmm. If you think of, okay, I've got to get up at 8 a.m. and go to war again, and then come home again and have a little rest and relaxation from the fight. I think that's the wrong way to think of it. My father-in-law went through 2 wars, World War II and the Korean War, as an Air Force pilot. And in the Korean War, he was flying bombing missions over North Korea out of Guam. And he had the opportunity to bring his family to live in Guam that he would fly out of. And they decided not to do it because he's off to work. He flies a bombing mission. He could get shot down. He goes into combat, and then he flies, and he's home for dinner, right? And it's no. If I'm going to be at war, I'm going to be at war. And he's not going to think of the home as R&R from the war.
Yeah, Uriah had that kind of mindset.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah. My brothers aren't in the campaign. I'm not going to go home and sleep with my wife and do that. I think that's a wartime footing mentality. Now, the Ecclesiastes exhortation to enjoy your wife, embrace eat the fat, drink the sweet, as Nehemiah puts it. That is not a respite from the war. I think that's our principal weapon in the war. Yeah. Right. So you've got a world that's despairing, the world that's trapped in these recurring cycles, the world that doesn't know what to do with it. They either kid themselves with a mindless hedonism, or they recognize the futility and sink into despair. Yeah. It's one or the other. It's either flighty or despairing. And Christians, I think, ought to eat the fat, drink the sweet, embrace the wife of their youth, do all these things as a way of – that's one of our principal weapons, where your non-believing neighbors come over and have for dinner, and these people laugh. These people are comfortable in their own skin, and they've not checked out. They know what's going on in the world, but this is their way of fighting it. Yeah. It's not their way of retreating from it or hiding from it.
Yeah, one of the distinctions he makes when he's reflecting on the king, a wise king feasts not for drunkenness, but feasts for strength. Right. It seems like it's that same kind of principle. It's like, well, what is the point
exactly
of being refueled? Okay, well, why don't we close with the end of the matter? So just kind of give us so chapter 12, remember now your creator in the days of your youth, and then we mentioned fear God and keep his commandments. So how does chapter 12 answer these meta-philosophical questions that every sophomore in college asks? You know, what is my purpose? What is my meaning? Is there meaning in the world? Where can meaning be found? How does chapter 12 answer some of these philosophical problems?
Well, basically what it does is chapter 12, verse 1 gives you the peg or the nail from which to hang everything. So remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. So what that is saying is, notice it doesn't say remember your Creator in your old age. It's remember your Creator in the days of your youth, so you don't come to old age with a pile of regrets. Yeah. Okay, so you're coming to I have no pleasure in them, and he goes on to describe in a series of sometimes bizarre metaphors to us, but he's describing the afflictions of old age. Your teeth going out, your eyesight failing, you can't sleep. You know, you've got all those things coming in your old age, down through verse 8. Okay, so in your youth, the fact that you have Nancy and I are currently living with my dad, who's 93, and he's chair-bound. He was a very, very active person throughout his life, and it's a weight on him that he can't support himself, he can't lift himself up, he can't walk. He has to be lifted everywhere. And the fact that he remembered his Creator in the days of his youth means that young people can come and he can tell them stories. He can tell them this is how God delivered me here. This is how God answered my prayer. I'm reading. He's got a new book out on answered prayer, and he's got a lifetime of stories because he remembered his Creator in the days of his youth. And now that he's trapped in a chair and wishes that he could do more, he's got an accumulated reservoir of things to draw on. Yeah. Right? And all these things are true of him. So this is coming. And he currently doesn't have the pleasures he used to have, but he still has a lifetime of service.
Yeah. Just concluding comments, advice for people who are reading this, maybe for the first time. Any words of advice so they don't end up cherry picking or getting the wrong message from it?
I would say it's a short book, 12 chapters, and they're not long chapters. I would say read it in one sitting. Don't wring it out like it's a washcloth. Don't read 2 verses and then try to squeeze all the meaning out of it, because this is a big picture book. Yeah. So not a picture book. It's a big picture book. So read it at one sitting. Think in terms of a sustained argument throughout, and then read it again the same way. Don't try to read it piecemeal devotionally, because you're going to have there'll be some verses, if you all by themselves, will not fit into your devotions.
Yeah. And enjoy Ecclesiastes, because up next we have what I think is probably the most challenging book to read. That is the prophet Jeremiah, which is a long book, which we'll talk about next week. So if you made it this far, well done. Until next time, keep on